Organized crime groups were a real scourge of the turbulent 90s. Although they existed during the Soviet era, it was the collapse of the Soviet Union that literally allowed organized crime to spill out onto the streets. Organized crime groups were typically formed by repeat offenders who had previously broken the law multiple times. While major criminal groups were dividing spheres of influence and trying to take over businesses, smaller gangs were engaged in robbery, racketeering, and theft. But there were also those among them who did not shy away from taking lives. One of the most brutal gangs in the Moscow suburbs in the mid-90s was the Nikolay Kapushchu gang. The gang members, burning with greed, didn't just take people's valuables and belongings. Kapushchu and his accomplices often tortured and killed their victims with particular cruelty, not sparing even children. The founder of the gang, Nikolay Kapushchu, was born in 1954 in Kazakhstan. Almost nothing is known about the childhood of the future criminal except that sometime after the child was born, the Kapushchu family moved to Tashkent. There, Kapushchu grew up and in 1988 was convicted of a serious crime for intentional homicide. According to the sentence, Kapushchu was supposed to spend 7 years behind bars, but he was released a year early in 1994. However, the future bandit did not feel any particular joy from such an early release, just like many other criminals. In prison, he contracted pulmonary tuberculosis which progressed rapidly, and within a few years it was supposed to take his life. According to one version, 40-year-old Nikolaev turned to crime precisely because he understood that he would probably not live long enough to go back to prison. In another version, he became a bandit to save money for treatment. Be that as it may, in that same 1994, Kapushchu moved to the Moscow region, to the Lyubertsy district, where he got a job as a driver at a local motor transport company. Despite the illness, Kapushchu got married and had 2 children. Soon he began to wonder how to get money for a different reason. The salary of a driver was tiny, and Kapushchu's family often went through hungry days. He kept telling himself it was time, but going through with it alone was risky. He needed accomplices. Pretty soon Kapushchu made friends who were ready to break the law. Along with him, there were Sergei Sirotko, who had served time for robbery, and his good acquaintances Valery Volkov and Vladimir Zubarev. Later on, the gang was joined by Vladimir Kuleshov, who had been convicted multiple times, and Sergei Tulikov, who was involved in a banditry case but was hiding from the investigation after being released from the detention center due to health reasons. One of Kapushchu's closest assistants was Vadim Zobov, who suffered from chronic alcoholism. In the future, the man would take on the role of gravedigger and would be responsible for burying the bodies. It is noteworthy that Kapushchu immediately set a strict rule for his accomplices not to lead a wild lifestyle, not to drink in public places, and not to show off their money. All celebrations and feasts had to take place only in safe houses. This way, the gang attracted less attention. The criminals obtained firearms without much difficulty and got down to business. They started robbing private houses and apartments. At first, there were no casualties. 3 or 4 adult men would break into a house waving their weapons around. And that was enough to scare the owners half to death, so they would hand over their valuables and money without resistance. To keep the victims out of the way and prevent trouble, the bandits would often handcuff them to the radiators. After that, Kapushcha and his friends would calmly clean out the house, taking money, electronics, and valuables. But by the summer of 1995, the criminals had blood on their hands for the first time. Apartment thefts didn't bring in any significant income, and it had to be split among the whole gang. Kapushchu suggested it was time to switch to targeting shuttle traders and local small business owners. Soon, the first victim was found. Valery Volkov had a girlfriend who was terribly bothered by her ex-husband Valery Serebryakov. Serebryakov, like many others in the 90s, made a living as a shuttle trader, buying clothes in Turkey and reselling them in Moscow. He had money. But, wanting to spite her ex-husband, the girlfriend told Volkov about how well Valera was living, and that he had just recently returned from Turkey with goods. That meant there would definitely be something worth taking in the house. Kapushchu and his companions eagerly acted on the tip. They ambushed Serebryakov when he was returning home. Forcing the man, who didn't have time to react, into the apartment, they immediately twisted his arms and handcuffed him to the radiator. The bandits took merchandise, radio equipment, about 7,000 United States dollars, and 140 million Russian rubles from the apartment. Apparently, the handcuffed Serebryakov behaved defiantly, or maybe personal motives got involved. The men beat him with batons so badly that he lost consciousness and almost died. Throughout 1995, the gang was engaged in robberies. Kapushchu spent money on medicine, sometimes even hiding it from his accomplices, but it still wasn't enough. Besides, by that time he already regretted bringing Sirotko into the gang. Sergei Sirotko was in charge of the loot, meaning he handled the distribution of the stolen goods, and he considered himself equal to Kapushchu in terms of authority within the gang. But Kapushchu had no intention of sharing power with anyone. The men began to have conflicts. At the same time as Sirotko, another member of the gang began to quarrel with the leader. It was Konstantin Kulagin, who also stopped liking the role of an errand boy. To show his accomplices who was in charge and to intimidate them, in May of '96, Kapushchu invited the whole gang out into nature, supposedly to practice shooting. There, in front of witnesses, he cold-bloodedly shot the orphan with a pistol. A few days later, the same fate befell Kulagin. In another account, Volkov carried out both alleged executions. However, Volkov himself did not outlive his executed gang members by much. According to some reports, the man was stabbed near his house on Kapushchu's orders. According to another version, Kapushchu himself dealt with Volkov, shooting him with a pistol, just like the others he didn't like. By that time, Vladimir Zubarev Kapushchu had left the gang. If he wanted to continue his criminal activities, and he did want to continue, he needed to recruit new people. In 1996, he met Vladimir Nikitin, born in 1965, known by the nicknames Vova, Little One, and Lawless. Nikitin had also been convicted, though for a much less serious offense than his new friends. He was convicted for failing to pay child support. Since 1991, he hadn't worked anywhere, used illegal substances, and was mentally unstable. Nikitin wore a circular tattoo around his neck with the inscription "Cutting Line." It was with Nikitin's arrival in the gang that a new chapter in its activities began. A chapter of brutal executions and a bloody trail that would follow the gang until its very end. Strong and ruthless, Nikitin made it clear almost immediately that it was better not to mess with him. It would be at his hands that most of the robbery victims would die, many after brutal torture. Soon after Nikitin, another man named Vladimir Gulevsky joined the gang. The man was convicted of intentional homicide in 1984 and served 13 years in a penal colony. Gulevsky swiftly joined the gang and recruited his friend and fellow inmate from the colony, Sergei Roslyakov, known as Kapusha. Roslyakov had been repeatedly convicted of banditry and had also recently returned from prison, where he was serving time for a serious crime. In '95, Roslyakov was arrested on charges of attacking a cash-in-transit guard, but thanks to a bribe, in '96 he was released despite his criminal record. Roslyakov was married, raising a child, and suffered from a severe stutter. Vladimir Milovanov, Evgeny Shishlov, and Valery Telegin also joined the gang. In the middle of the autumn of '96, Kapushchu and his accomplices decided to rob the apartment of Gennady Vinnikov, the director of an underground vodka bottling plant. Vinnikov was Nikitin's former employer, and he told the gang that the plant made a big profit every day, up to $1,000. They went to do the job confidently, deciding to act according to their usual plan. However, the owner of the apartment was not at home. The door was opened for the criminals by Vinnikov's wife, and behind her stood a man, his brother Andrei. There was also the businessman's little daughter in the apartment. The bandits tied up the woman and the girl and covered them with thick blankets so they wouldn't interfere. Then they put a knife to Andrei Vinnikov's throat and started demanding money. Andrei said that the criminals wouldn't get any money because there was none in the apartment. "Stop lying to me. Tell me where the money is, or I'll cut off your ear." Kapushchu leaned over the man. Andrei stubbornly shook his head. Then Kapushchu grabbed his ear and slashed it with a knife. The man screamed in pain. The bandits threw the severed ear on the floor, then frustrated, left the apartment. Vinnikov rushed to untie his brother's wife and daughter and found that they had almost suffocated under the thick blankets. The nightmare for the Vinnikov family did not end there. But while they got a break in 1997, Kapushchu and Zobov worked together for a while, and Kapushchu thought it was a good idea to rob. By answering ads, the criminals bought a newspaper from hand to hand, looked for ads selling cars, and went to meet the owner. Usually the role of the prospective buyer was played by Zobov. He would suggest meeting the car owner somewhere busy so as not to arouse suspicion. Later, Kapushchu would join them. Zobov would suggest taking a drive in the car to see how it runs. After driving to a more or less deserted place, the criminals would pull out their weapons. Getting out of the car, Kapushchu would quickly growl. The frightened owner obeyed. Zobov was the driver, and the car would take off. That's how the gang managed to seize 4 Volga cars and a Zhiguli. The cars were dismantled and sold for parts. The police rather quickly identified a pattern common to similar cases and even launched an interception plan. But luck was on Kapushchu and his accomplices' side at that time. They weren't caught. By that time, however, Kapushchu was no longer pleased by luck in criminal matters. His time was running out quickly and the medicine was no longer of any use. Weakened, constantly coughing, suffering from shortness of breath and chest pains, Kapushchu realized in the summer of 97 that he was doomed, and if that's the case, then he had nothing left to lose. In July of 97, Rozlyakov shared with his friends information that his wife's friend, a certain Tamara Potapova, who worked at the Luzhniki market, was lending people money. She was profiting well from it. Next week she'll be brought 5,000 in cash, Rozlyakov said. We could pay her a visit. Kapushchu approved the plans on July 27, 1997. Kapushchu, Rozlyakov, and Gulevsky, part of a gang, forced their way into Potapova's apartment, pushing her against the wall as they entered, giving her no time to react. The men threatened the woman with pistols and started searching the house for money. 5,000 in cash, where is it? Kapushchu pressed a pistol to the woman's head and demanded an answer. Potapova swore that she hadn't received any money, not today or in the past few days. Gradually growing more savage, the bandits kept searching the wardrobes over and over, dumping the contents of the drawers onto the floor. Under Kapushchu's dissatisfied gaze, Rozlyakov tried harder than anyone else. When no money was actually found, it was unanimously decided to get rid of Potapov. The woman who begged for mercy was mercilessly strangled with a braided cord. A Japanese television and a set of gilded spoons were taken from the apartment. Kapushchu complained about the lack of promised cash after the gangsters left. We just wasted our time, Rozlyakov stuttered worse than before and swore it wouldn't happen again. In August 1997, Vova Bezpredelshchik once again led the gang to target entrepreneurs. To start with, the bandits caught and brutally beat his friend, Alexander Chekmaryov, a worker at the underground vodka and Klayukovka aperitif production shop. Chekmaryov, covered in blood and tears, gave the bandits the address of the shop owner in Moscow, Nikolay Samilin. And this time, Kapush seemed to get lucky. The entrepreneur was at home, so they tied up Samilin and his wife. The bandits started searching the apartment, but there were few valuables and little money. Kapushchu figured that Samilin must have a stash hidden somewhere in the apartment. They needed to make the couple confess where it was. Vova the Lawless grabbed a soldering iron, while Kapushchu gripped his knife more comfortably. Both the woman and the man swore that there was nothing else in the house, but that didn't stop the criminals. Ilyan and his wife were tortured with a soldering iron and knife by the criminals until they were satisfied. The disfigured, bloodied women finally threw a rope around the man's neck and tightened it. Kapushchu stabbed him in the neck 4 times, then handed the knife to Zobov, who also struck. After finishing off the owners, in the quiet and without hurrying, the bandits gathered all the valuables in the apartment and left. Kapushchu told the bandits that Chekmaryova also needs to be eliminated as they were entering the vehicle. The weakling whiner will give us up right away. They didn't delay dealing with Chekmaryov. Already the day after the robbery, Kapushcha, Vova Bezpredelshchik, and Vadim Zobov intercepted Chekmaryov on the street. They forced him into a car and took him to a forested area between the villages of Matyakova and Torbiva. Chekmaryov cried again and begged for mercy, but the criminals were indifferent to his pleas. Kapushcha and Zobov threw the man to the ground and held him down, while Nikitin put a stick on his throat and simply jumped on it. The man's neck cracked as he let out a desperate wheeze. When the convulsions stopped, Kapushcha gave a familiar nod to Zobov Zakopayev. He obediently took the shovel. That same day, Kapushcha decided to visit Gennady Vinnikov again. After their first failed raid, the bandits held a grudge against the businessman. This time, they decided to ambush him at the workshop instead of breaking into his apartment. When Vinnikov drove up to the workshop in his car, they were already waiting for him. The bandits grabbed the man, gagged him, tied him up, and put him in the car. On the way, they took the gold chain from the businessman and cut off his ear. This time, only his mother Nina was in Vinnikov's apartment. When she saw her son covered in blood, the woman gasped. Kapushchu coldly ordered, "Hands behind your back or I'll cut off your ear just like I did to your son." The woman, trembling, obeyed. The mother and son were forced to watch as the bandits ransacked the apartment, carrying out valuables. But that wasn't all. The apartment still had no money. Kapushchu got angry, asking, "How much longer?" Vinnikov mocked him. "Load him into the car," he said angrily. "You'll tell us where the money is." Nina Vinnikova screamed, realizing she would never see her son alive again. That's exactly what happened. Gennady Vinnikov was first brought to Gulevsky's apartment, where they cut him with a knife and demanded to know where the money was hidden. After that, the bleeding man was taken to the bank of the Moskva River, where they put a tow rope around his neck and hanged him. Vinnikov died in agony. Burned documents and a white glove were found next to his body. According to Nina Vinnikova's testimony, the first police sketch of the criminal, dubbed the Southerner due to his distinctive facial features, was created. The police sketch was sent out to police departments. After such a serious crime, criminals usually lie low to avoid attracting attention, but Kapushchu's gang appeared to enjoy it. The next day, on August 23, 1997, Vova Bespredelshchik brought news to Nikolay Kapushchu. In the village of Verkhnaya Meshkovo, Ramensky district, Moscow region, right next to his partner's house, the entrepreneur Yelena Larina is building a luxurious dacha. Like many people at that time, the woman was engaged in shuttle trading. While waiting for the construction to be completed, Yelena and her partner Oleg Semikin, along with 3 young children, the oldest being 14 and the youngest only 10, lived in 2 temporary trailers next to the house. "It looks like she has money, and there's a summer house planned there. Wow," Nikitin told his accomplices with shining eyes. Kapushchu saw a chance to make money, but scouting was necessary before proceeding. He decided they needed to find out everything. Since she has workers there, they should arrange drinks and snacks to get them talking. Nikitin quickly befriended the unsuspecting Ukrainian construction workers who eagerly went to meet the bandits. The vodka glasses weren't allowed into the hideout after they got tipsy. The workers said that Larina had already spent almost $30,000 on the construction and was planning to spend even more. "And the work there is nowhere near finished yet," the builders said. "She'll invest at least twice as much." "And how does she pay? Is it decent? No delays?" Nikitin asked. "She pays well and doesn't shortchange you?" The drunk men nodded. "She should be coming back from Turkey tomorrow. She'll bring the money and goods and settle up with us." Kapushchu and the gang members looked at each other, while Nikitin smirked openly. Fortunately, he had visited the Larin's construction site. "Tomorrow we can already pay a visit to the wealthy businesswoman." Initially, the criminals, as Nikitin stated later, did not plan to take the lives of either Elena Larina or her family. But they were already used to dealing with their victims, and it only took a few words for the situation to get out of control. On the evening of August 24, 1997, the gang of Kapushchu, Nikitin, Zobov, Roslyakov and Gulevsky broke into Larina's house. When she herself and her housemates, the children, were already getting ready to go to bed. The following events are described in Vova Bespredelshchik Nikitin's own words. In the first room the bandits looked into, the children were sleeping. Oleg ran out when he heard the noise. He was immediately grabbed and hit on the head. The unconscious man was tied up and left lying on the floor. Nikitin and Roslyakov looked into the other room, where Elena, Larina and her daughter were. "Give me the money," demanded Nikitin, pointing a gun at the woman. But Larina shook her head and held her child close. "We're out of money. Take my jewelry instead," the woman said as she removed her gold earrings and necklace. "Take them, we don't have any money." Nikitin took the jewelry but didn't put away the gun. "Give me the money or it'll get worse." The little girl in her mother's arms stared in terror at the strange man holding a weapon. "Mommy, give him the money," she whispered. But Larina shushed Dodges, telling him to be quiet. Nikitin got angry. He saw Elena's goods in the house. His accomplices were loading them into the car, and he knew for sure that the woman had come from Turkey with money. Why is she being so stubborn? An engine sound came from outside. Zobov was already leaving the crime scene with the goods. Kapushchu entered the room. "What's going on? Why are you stalling? Tell me, where's the money and the keys to the Moscow apartment?" But Larina kept insisting that she didn't have any more money, and then the ruthless Nikitin decided he'd had enough. Without further words, the criminal tied up Larina's children's hands and took the girl and boy to another room. There he tied the children's legs and laid them on the bed. Then he gagged the boy, and after that he returned to the already tied up Larina and the remaining girl. Nikitin taped the woman's mouth shut, then put a gun to the child's head and looked Larina in the eyes. "Did you bring this on yourself?" And he pulled the trigger. The child's head jerked and blood splattered in all directions. Larina screamed horribly and desperately through the tape, but Nikitin just gave a cold smirk. Now there was no stopping him. With his gun at the ready, he headed to the room where he had left Larina's other two children. The boy was lying motionless on the bed. An examination would later determine that by that time he had suffocated from the gag that the criminal had shoved too deep into his mouth. Nikitin shot the girl almost at point-blank range. He also shot the boy, not knowing that he was already dead. When Nikitin returned to the room, Larina, who was in deep shock, gave them the keys to the apartment. But there was no reason to leave the woman alive anymore. She met the same fate as the children. Afterward, the bandits burned down the house and fled. Larina's common-law husband Oleg never regained consciousness after being struck on the head and was burned alive. On the morning of August 24th, the criminals visited Elena Larina's Moscow apartment. With no neighbors or Kapushchu around, his accomplices loaded the deceased's belongings into the red Zhiguli. A police department officer who happened to be passing by on his way to work noticed this. He found it suspicious that some men were loading large bags and a television into the car. Maybe they're moving, the man thought to himself, but he still decided to write down the car's license plate number and drop the note into a trash can near the local police department. That same day, during the investigation into the death of Yelena Larina and her family, when detectives visited the robbed Moscow apartment and stopped by the local police department, the suspicious car's license plate number came up. It turned out that the car was registered to a former member of Volkov's gang, whom Kapushchu had cold-bloodedly dealt with 6 months earlier. According to reports, the car was registered to Kapushchu. The Zhiguli was driven under power of attorney by Sergei Razlyakov, and the chassis and engine numbers were altered by the gang's mechanic Meshkov Razlyakov. When he was called to the police to give a statement, he immediately claimed that the car had been stolen since August 22nd. He hadn't seen Nikolay Kapushchu for months. The investigators went to Kapushcha's registered address, but his ex-wife told them that they hadn't lived together for a year, and he doesn't show up here either. Razlyakov was released, but he understood that he would now be under constant surveillance. A thread led to Nikolay Kapushchu. They should have been more careful. A few days after the massacre of the Larin family, Kapushchu and his closest aide, Zobov, decided to visit the burned-down house. It's not clear what they wanted to find there, but near the house, the bandits ran into the duty officers. Kapushchu and Zobov were stunned at first, and then they ran away. The criminals escaped by swimming across the Moskva River after officers shot at them. They left their car behind. While the investigation and search were ongoing, Kapushchu and his accomplices managed to commit several more robberies and take the lives of 2 people. One of the victims, a Moldovan citizen named Peshterian, became the victim of a fatal accident. Vladimir Nikitin simply didn't like his face, and with a shot from his pistol he turned the man's face into a bloody mess. After Peshterian's death, they stabbed him in the abdomen with a knife, letting his insides out. Following their custom, they then cut off his ear. They threw the poor man's body into the Pikhorka River. The last victim of Kapushchu's gang was a police officer from the main directorate of internal affairs for the Moscow Metro, Sergeant Ivan Teterkin. His body was found in a house on Pioneskaya Street in the village of Tamilya in the Lyubertsy district of the Moscow region in early September of '97. To make identification of the body more difficult, the gangsters tried to burn it. Kapushchu understood perfectly well that the life cycle of his criminal gang was coming to an end. The car was left at Larin's house, and when they abandoned it, Razlyakov was interrogated and they visited his ex-wife. The gang's demise is inevitable, with time running out quickly. After the attack on Teterkin, a plan formed in Kapush's mind.
Let's bring it up to...
Let's drive a fuel truck up to the police station building and blow it up, he suggested to his accomplices at the next meeting. It'll burn like crazy. Documents and files will be destroyed. By the time they recover, we'll already be gone. The final part of the plan was for the gang members to escape abroad. By that time, Kapushchu himself intended to get fake documents to make it even harder to catch him, but the bandits' plan was not meant to succeed. The investigators had already inquired about Kapushchu with Uzbekistan's Ministry of Internal Affairs and swiftly received a response. Soon, they had detailed information about the criminal's identity. Already on October 15, 1997, Nikolay Kapushchu was detained at a market in Moscow and immediately arrested. He did not resist, was constantly coughing and generally looked exhausted and sick. Immediately after his arrest, Kapushchu categorically denied his involvement in both the robberies and the more serious crimes. One day, he attempted to smuggle a note outside which read, "Roslyakov, Seryoga, you don't know anything, we were betrayed. Make arrangements among yourselves, let me know in any way where the stuff is. Let the guys get out of there, take everything with them, they know about the gasoline, about everything." In the same note, Kapushchu urged his accomplices to put all the blame on Vova Malenki, that is, on Nikitin. But that didn't save any of them anymore. In October and November, other gang members were also arrested. Roslyakov immediately began to give confessions, including about the massacre of Yelena Larina's family. Triligin was found with a pistol that had been used to shoot the Larins and commit 2 other crimes. In total, the gang was responsible for 14 murders. The number of robberies, however, was in the dozens. Vladimir Nikitin, Vovka the Little One, was also soon arrested at one of the thieves' gatherings. The examination showed that Nikitin was mentally healthy and committed all his atrocities with a clear mind and full awareness of what was happening. It was only in March of 1999 that Nikolay Kapushchu also began to confess to his crimes. His testimony was full of cynicism and indifference. He felt no sympathy for the victims, not even for the children. By that time, the illness that Kapushchu suffered from had already reached its final stage. The criminal was practically bedridden and knew very well that he didn't have much time left. That's probably why he started talking. He knew he wouldn't survive to reach prison. On March 17, 1999, Nikolay Kapushchu died in a cell at Matrosskaya Tishina detention center from complications of tuberculosis. He died before the court's verdict. March 22, 2000. The jury delivered a guilty verdict for 4 members of the gang: Kapushchu, Roslyakov, Gulevsky, Nikitin and Zobov. The lawless Nikitin received a life sentence. Roslyakov was sent to prison for 21 years. The gravedigger, Zobov, for 20 and Gulevsky for 17. Vladimir Nikitin is currently serving his sentence at VK 5 Vologodsky Piatek. He does not repent for his crimes. The fates of his 3 gang associates, whose prison terms have already ended, are unknown.